And you know, this is just a Zoom observation. We've all been in meetings where there were some people where we really wanted to mute them, please. And I mean, I've never done it and I've never seen it done. It's very rude, but you know, sometimes people just don't stop.
Right.
You know, and you can try to interrupt. I think that's the thing, is just to interrupt and get you on the screen and talk louder. I don't know. Okay,
All right. Well,
Will you be at the book group Monday?
pardon?
Will you be at the book group Monday?
Yeah, love that
Because-
book.
Yeah, I won't be
that
there.
book?
I'm getting my shot.
Okay.
That's the time they gave me, and I wasn't going to argue about it.
yeah.
No.
Right. If you get an appointment, you go.
Oh, yeah.
Laura, do you want me to put me in charge of that group?
Well, Sylvia, it's Sylvia's book. And
Okay.
Sylvia said she would do it, but she's been having trouble. Remember, she had trouble getting on last time.
Okay, well, I'll know that you're not coming and jump in if I need to.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and text her, forward my email to her. I think what's happening is when it comes from Susan Jackson, it must be going in her spam and she doesn't know how to look for that. So I'm going to forward my invitation to her and maybe that'll work.
Why don't you share with the group that wonderful book we're reading? I can't remember the exact title. I just remembered Arthur True The
Story of Arthur Trulove.
Oh, I love that book. That's
Yeah, it's a good book.
Yeah.
and
Where's my pen?
Yeah.
and Barry, it isn't this. Is it just a story of? Is that right?
Mhm.
The
Okay.
true story of. The true
The
story of.
story of. Yeah.
The true story of.
Sorry, yeah.
I can't. I didn't even look to see when it was written, but it's so appropriate for right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. You know,
That
just
would be good.
a way
Kindness and
a way forward. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I agreed to lead this group today, and I've been here for over a week in Kansas, so, and clearly have only been out of the house a couple of times, so there's really no excuse. And our truck of stuff hasn't arrived, so I haven't been unpacking other than what we took out of our car. So life is relatively simple at the moment. Complications ahead, but we'll deal with that. Anyway, the name of this story is The Catastrophist, and it was published in the New Yorker July 27th, 2020. But the actual interview took place back in June of 2009 with this James Hansen. So she actually wrote the story the first time back in 2009, and the New Yorker decided it was very appropriate to put something in currently, or last summer anyway, about a scientist who has gotten involved politically, kind of kicking and screaming about not wanting to do it, but feeling like the only way he could get people to listen was to be an activist. And interestingly enough, last night, I don't know if any of you watched this last night, the PBS NewsHour, they talked about a play that's actually streaming on the Roundhouse called The Catastrophist. And that catastrophist is Nathan Wolfe, and he's a virologist, and the playwright is his wife. And he has done this same kind of thing that James Hansen did, as far as getting involved in politics, making people listen, try to get people to act on the science. So I just thought it was so interesting, because the first thing I heard is The Catastrophist, and I thought, wait a minute, that's what we're talking about tomorrow. So anyway, just a little back stuff. I did a little bit of research about Hansen. He was born in 1941 in Iowa. He worked for NASA for 46 years in the Goddard Institute for Space Studies, and then retired in 2013. And currently he is with the National Center for Science Education at Columbia University, the Earth Institute. And he does programming on climate science awareness and solutions. So he's still busy working. He's basically 79 years old and about to be 80 next month. So he's an adjunct professor. And he has a TED Talk called Advocacy of Action to Avoid Dangerous Climate Changes. And it was, his TED Talk was recorded, said why I must speak out about climate change in 2012. I didn't try to find it. I don't know if a TED Talk that old would be available, but might be interesting to hear what he said back, that's 9 years ago. But anyway, so what did you all think about this article? What stood out for you?
Linda, I had a moment of panic, but I think I'm okay. Mine's called The Climate Expert Who Delivered News No One Wanted to Hear. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah,
I
exactly.
call it The Catastrophist. Is that?
Well, the title of the article was The Catastrophist.
Oh,
but
good. Okay. I'm thinking, oh my God, how did that happen? Okay.
yeah, but the subtitle on it, I can show you this, but up here below it says NASA's climate expert delivers the news no one wants to hear.
Okay.
So yeah,
Thank you.
so
That's fine. I'm in.
okay. Yeah. It's the same thing.
Okay.
And I mean, Elizabeth Kolbert has been very active in climate. She's written The Sixth Extinction. She's written all kinds of things. And in fact, the February 8th New Yorker issue had a new day for the climate. It remains to be seen whether Joe Biden's sweeping climate directives can make a meaningful difference, but a critical threshold has been crossed. So, she's still writing extensively about climate and very involved. And, I've read her stuff for a long time. And every time I see her name on something, that's what I want to read. So anyway, so yes, you read the right article.
Okay. Right.
Probably when Lori downloaded it, because mine is from the original magazine that I cut out, but probably I didn't even pull it up to see what it looked like when she put it on PDF. So, I mean, I guess the first thing is, what is the connection between science and policies? What do we have to think about?
Well, I think one thing that bothered me about the article, that's probably the wrong word, but it was from 2009. And I think things have gotten much worse since 2009.
Well,
and I think since 2009, to me, one thing that has changed is I think young people are getting more active than in the past. It's interesting, the class, I was telling you all that I've got 2 Zoom classes at the same time. Well, the Zoom class I was just in that I left was through my master gardeners, because I'm a master gardener. And the speaker today was on climate change and what we can do as homeowners, apartment owners, gardeners, what we can do in our own little way to help. And so it was interesting that was who I was talking today, because it was just what we were going to talk about. But he was showing a bunch of graphics, and in the last 12 years since 2009, when this article was written, things are globally, they're much worse. And so that bothered me. And then the other thing I wanted to say was, I think it was interesting that this man for half of his career was not a political activist. And most of us, I don't know, I think a lot of us, when we get older, become less active.
Mm-hmm.
It's not true for me particularly, but a lot of people. But he had found that he couldn't not be active now with what he knew. I thought that was interesting, that he'd become more and more an activist as his career went on. That's
I think reading about, I mean, even his wife talking about, he just couldn't stay away from the protests and the political activism and getting arrested several times, because he could tell that nobody was paying attention. They were letting it go. And I mean, he had thought, because of early on, the chlorofluor, I can't even pronounce it, the things that are in refrigerator, were used to be
fluorocarbons.
Yeah, that the activism at that point actually did get those banned.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I did.
He was optimistic that if he got this information out, that politics, people in the position of doing something about it would actually act. But instead, there's been no action, not very little action. And now the question is, can Biden do enough?
All right, so I'd like to comment about your
Good.
question about, the relationship between science and politics is that, so I think it really depends on who the politicians are about whether or not any action is taken. I guess the most recent example, is all the misinformation about the vaccine when, Trump was in office and that was a good example of how the politics seem to take precedence over scientific information. But in the case of like the fluorocarbons, that the politicians at that time took heed and something was done about it. So I think it really depends on who the politicians are, but I don't think you can always count. I mean, I think obviously you can't count on the fact that whatever science says is always accepted by everyone.
Well, I immediately, as I was reading about Hansen, thought about Fauci and what kinds of roles he has played back since the 80s when he was so involved with AIDS, and how, nobody paid any attention to him at first and thought he was crazy. And even Reagan didn't at first, but he finally got Reagan's ear, and Reagan finally did do something about it, but, kicking and screaming. So
I would like to, I really need some clarification, because I was reading this whole thing and I trying to kind of segue from what I know and what's been said. And when you say climate change, I know what we're talking about, and we're watching our shorelines, and we're watching the poles melt and the polar bears be stranded, et cetera, et cetera. And that, of course, has been going on for a long time. I don't understand the place of coal in all of this. Are we coal dependent still? I don't where does it, and if so, that means that Kansas City Power and Light, Northern NIPSCO up in Indiana, these huge power plants are running on coal.
Yes.
Where does that coal come from? How does it get there, and how much does it take? I mean, that seems like something that moves in trains. Somebody tell me how this works.
Yes.
All those long trains of hopper cars that you may occasionally encounter.
I just saw one actually.
75% of it's coal, I'll bet you.
right. And the railroads are pro coal because they make a lot of money on transporting coal.
So we don't still have miners in the coal mine.
Yes, we do.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
I thought that was kind of passe.
No.
The
Go to
basic,
Appalachia.
yeah, it's the basic bread and butter industry in that part of the U.S.
So maybe conditions are better, but it's still.
Conditions aren't better either.
No.
They're doing strip mining, they're taking the tops off of mountains. That's for coal. That's to get coal.
Okay.
Strip mining is,
I
It's just
will
awful.
say, Diana, I have a friend whose condo overlooks all of downtown Kansas City. So we were looking out her window, and this huge train, she looks down on Union Station, and this huge train was going by. And I mean, we were counting the cars. I have never seen a train that long. 10, 20, 30. I mean, it was amazing, but that's what you're saying, probably. Yeah. And I was wondering at the time, what's actually being transported on a railroad card. So there you go.
If it isn't containers that you see of the type that come over the road, pretty clear it's going to be coal.
About 40% of the power in America comes from coal. And in China, it's about 80%. So think of China.
China's still building new power plants, and they're not building carbon neutral. I mean, that's what Biden has said something about. Yes, we probably still need coal, but we need to be producing it in a way that's carbon neutral. And of course, that's very expensive, and that's where the problem comes in. It's cost. One of the problems is cost. It's and jobs and all kinds of other reasons why why people are opposed to eliminating coal as our source of energy.
And the strength of lobbying groups.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. You look who's paying various politicians for their political campaigns. There's a lot of it.
Want to be really, really depressed, go to, do any of you look at ProPublica.org?
Once in a while.
I've
Okay,
seen some of it. I don't.
ProPublica has a section, you just put in climate change. And if you want to put in climate change graphics, it has all these interesting charts about what has happened in the last 30 years, projections for the future.
Hmm.
And I was just looking at an article here, how climate change is contributing to skyrocketing rates of infectious disease. Articles like that. It's so depressing.
And
But-
please notice it's not causing, it's contributing. You know, it's, I don't want to say it's anti-science, but it's clearly pointing to the fact that there are lots of factors. I mean, I'm not pro coal, but I'm just saying.
The article
that, you
goes
know,
ahead and says, it says, the scientists who study how disease emerge in a changing environment knew this moment was coming. Climate change is making outbreaks of disease more common and more dangerous. And then it goes on to explain what they mean by that.
Mhm.
So it's an interesting website. They don't just do climate change, they do stuff on everything. But I looked at climate change when we were talking about this because I knew they had a lot on it, but it has some interesting graphics.
Well, okay, let's talk about that for a minute. How can climate change affect disease?
Okay,
Pollution.
all right.
To begin with. the small-
When diseases leap from animals to humans,
Yes.
and humans are in much more close, and the animals are coming out because their climate change is going around, and humans are going in because they need food. There's more opportunity for those leaps
The
to
interaction.
happen.
Mhm.
And it says climate warming is demolishing the defense systems to keep people apart, driving a catastrophic loss in biodiversity that, when coupled with reckless deforestation and aggressive conversion of wildland, pushes farmers and people closer together and opens the gate. That was one way.
Right.
Coronavirus being a prime example.
Sure, sure.
Well, I think one of the reasons that China has gotten on the bandwagon to some extent is because of the kinds of pollution that they've had in their, for instance, Beijing, and people, I mean, that's why they were wearing masks before there were viruses that needed to be worn masks for, because the pollution. And if you look back, I think it was in The Crown that they talked about that period of time in London where they had that horrible
the yellow air, yeah.
Inversion, yeah.
hundreds of people died, and it was coal. It was all because of coal. So there's, I mean, we've known for at least 70 years that coal causes problems for the environment and health for humans. So not to mention all the other effects, like you're talking about, the biodiversity and the lacking of forests and land for animals to live on. It's all encompassing.
Another example here was, we know that migratory birds are much less diverse and much fewer than they were, largely because of climate change and lack of their environment. Well, when there aren't as many birds, there's more mosquitoes, and mosquitoes spread disease. So that's what they're meaning by not that climate change causes disease, but because of the effects of climate change, it's easier for diseases to spread, mosquitoes being an example.
Okay, so now that I figured out that we're using coal and we shouldn't be, tell me then if we totally replace coal with what?
Well, that's so the
That's the kicker.
64 million, maybe it's $1 billion. but
Billion, yeah.
now is, well, since we've known about this for 40, 50 years, why are we still using coal? Is it politics? Is it because politicians bend to the will of people who want to make more money who are in the coal business? Or is it because there isn't really any viable way to replace it?
Well, let's start with that viable way, because that's important.
Well, I mean,
What are we gonna
what
raise
are the
money
alternatives?
for?
The alternatives are nuclear power plants, right?
Nuclear, okay.
Hydroelectric plants can produce electricity, solar power and wind.
Okay.
That's basically, yeah, that's basically it.
Wind
Okay, so
power,
my-
water.
Well, hydroelectric. Yeah.
Yeah, and aren't like big cities run on hydroelectric? I'm talking about New York City when there's a blackout. That's not coal run.
Yes, coal is
That's
still,
correct.
something has to turn the turbines. So there's
Yeah.
still energy involved in just producing hydroelectric
Right,
currents.
hydroelectric. So to get hydroelectric power, you have to build dams. So that in itself has an effect on the environment. Anywhere you build a dam up a river, you're
The dam thing.
changing that whole
Okay,
ecosystem there. And
Topography.
so there are benefits to
There are
that,
intended consequences, yeah.
yeah, but there are, things as well. So, nuclear power plants, well, yeah,
Waste.
Nobody wants them in their neighborhood.
there's not, but they're not, free of potential catastrophes, such as happened in Japan. So,
It's interesting because Hansen, this catastrophist, is in favor of nuclear. He said, if we don't have nuclear plants, we're never going to get here because we're still going to have to be relying on coal and gas and oil.
but I mean, that's
That
probably,
was
and probably one of the reasons everything hasn't switched over is just, well, you can maybe replace a lot of coal with nuclear plants, but on the other hand, then there's a downside to that as well. I mean, and that's part of that's political.
Right.
But part
I
of it,
have to wonder if that was his position in 20, whatever it is, that was in 2009, if that has shifted a little bit with respect to nuclear in the ensuing 12 years.
I don't know. I couldn't tell in the stuff that I read about him.
Yeah,
where
I couldn't either.
Which from his interest in nuclear or pro-nuclear. I mean, clearly he wants nuclear plants built that are safe and that have a way of disposing of the or
Exactly.
using up the byproducts so that they're not buried in a mine someplace, or the ideas that they shoot it off into space. I mean, some of the ideas they've had for that is insane. It sounds insane to me anyway.
okay, I'm so science challenged. Define nuclear energy to me. What does that mean?
well, nuclear energy really is, using atomic, it's really related to atomic bombs and being able to take advantage of the stored up power in atoms and some elements, uranium being the most common example, is that there's a lot of energy tied up there, and that in natural radioactivity, the nucleus kind of spontaneously explodes and sends out lots of little particles. Well, you can take that, and if you can confine that in a small space, that you can cause a chain reaction to occur, so that there's a lot, instead of one or two or a few atoms, such as occurs naturally on the Earth, you put a lot of them together, that you get a lot of energy released in a short period of time, and that results in an explosion. But if you can control that, such as in nuclear power plants, they control the rate of atoms exploding, basically, by having by understanding that you can slow that down by absorbing some of the neutrons that get I might be going to, anyway, some of them get expelled when an atom explodes. So you can control the rate of explosion, and that energy you then,
Well,
can-
it's the whole idea of harnessing that energy in a safe way that produces electricity, which then does all the other things. So, I mean, but the problem is the quote unquote safe way. And obviously there have been accidents, although the numbers have not been horrendous. When they happen, they're horrible, like the Chernobyl and Three
Okay, there
Mile
you go.
Island.
Yeah,
and-
yeah.
Yeah.
And thank you, Gary. That was really, good of you to, get down to those very fine points. And you're right to remind me about Chernobyl, because there is that. How many nuclear energy plants do we have? Or are they few and far between now since Chernobyl?
I don't know
yeah,
how
I
many.
mean, there's still several. There are some, close to us. There's some on the Missouri River up north. I don't remember exactly where it
Really?
is, but there's several operating in the US, and they've operated safely for a long time, and really around the world.
There's one in southern Kansas.
58 in the United States. There's 58. I just looked it up. Now, Wolf Creek is a nuclear plant.
Okay,
Right.
okay, good. Because I thought, that kind of helps me with my first question, that we aren't using coal everywhere. Yeah.
Here's the answer. I just asked Siri. As of October 31st, 2020, there were 56 commercially operating nuclear power plants with 94 nuclear power reactors in 28 US states.
Oh, mine was 29 states, so they must have closed.
You guys, Siri looked in the same place. Thank you, Laura, Siri, and Linda.
Latest way of finding out stuff. Ask the cell phone.
Mhm, mhm.
I mean, I guess getting back to, is it the responsibility of a scientist who has discovered some of these alarming facts to become involved politically? In other words, this James Hansen, the catastrophist, felt compelled to go to protests, to go to coal plants and get arrested. Fauci has taken a lot of heat. He's had threats of death to his families by expressing what he believes is the truth. So
Mhm.
how do we feel about scientists doing this kind of thing?
Well, historically, scientists, Galileo was excommunicated from the Catholic Church for saying the earth wasn't the center of the universe.
Right.
And he had to recant it. So science and politics have been
Mhm.
sometimes at odds for generations and generations. But in answer to your question, I think it's certainly going to be up to the individual. I don't think there's a mandate that a scientist has to be an activist, but it's probably difficult not to be if they've got a moral core.
Right. Yeah, it sounded like, just reading about Hansen, it sounds like he felt very compelled because people weren't listening, and the only way he could make people listen was to do things that got him arrested and got him drummed out of the climate scientist groups. I mean, a lot of the climate scientists, I think even still now, have lost respect for him because they feel like he's spent too much time on politics and not enough time on the science.
Mhm.
Well, I'm concerned about the message that sends about science,
Yeah, exactly.
because it's like, oh, go away. I don't want you to bother me. I'm busy with my test tubes.
Right.
And that's fine, but that certainly is self-insulating and not helpful to the general welfare.
Well, and I think the comparison to this past year, actually, it has been nearly, when we started looking at the science of the new virus, and
Mhm.
And there was this push-pull constantly between I don't want to hear that. Science
It'll
isn't
go
always
away.
right. I don't know.
It'll go away like the flu.
Yeah.
So the normal way that scientists don't communicate their findings is through publications. They publish papers in journals, and that sometimes those come to the attention other media, newspapers, magazines, and so on, maybe pick up on some of those, but to go the next step to try to get that message before the general public or politicians is a whole other step. I think most scientists are probably ill-equipped, personality-wise and emotionally, to take that step to get into the public arena and try to change the way people think about things, that they're more disposed to, as Diana said, look at their test tubes and stay in the lab and make their discoveries and write a paper every once in a while.
Well, which of course segues to Linda's question maybe 10 minutes ago about the new Biden administration and their emphasis on, letting science lead more and speak more. And, how might, I think, what was your question, Linda? How might things look different under a new administration?
Right. I mean, here's an article that this was the article that Elizabeth Kolber was published January 31st, 2021. And it talked about time to wake up. It's like a photograph showed a photograph of the Earth as seen from space, time to wake up. There was all kinds of things showing that where forests had been destroyed, where what used to be green was now desert, lots of visual effects that show that. And basically this man, he was a senator, White House, back in 2018 said, indeed, it is well past time for Congress to wake up to the disastrous effects of global climate change. Anyway, he's still at it till trying to get the Senate to pay attention. He had given a speech in the chamber for 279 times he'd actually given speeches on the Senate floor, which that's a senator who got the message or has tried to get the message. So, and Biden really took seriously the threat posed by global warming. He talked about it a lot during the campaign. It was definitely one of his prime pieces of his plans, but on the other hand, he did not sign on to the Green Deal that the AOC and other people in Congress had put out. So he hasn't totally signed on to that. I mean, realistically,
at least not visibly yet.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I can relate to the global warming thing when we're talking about polar bears and coastlines and flooding and, all the stuff that affects us immediately. And that's such a touchy-feely kind of a topic versus, nuclear power plants that you would think people could get when it starts affecting people's, coastlines and where people live. And that's very close to home. That's, Florida and the East Coast and the South Coast, everywhere.
Well,
that's a good point.
It's
You
don't
make a good
build your house on a place where you're going to slide into the ocean in California with the mudslides.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all over the country. People want what they want, and they build on a fault line, or they build on a floodplain, or they build on a high place that's not going to stay a high place.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, what was I going to say? It'll come back to me here in a minute. Well, the weather we're having today is due to climate change because the Arctic got too warm and pushed all the big polar vortex south. So it's a direct, even though it's colder than.
I was going to say that's interesting because it is so cold.
Right.
You can't say we're warming
What I
up.
read is the reason we're having this much cold right now is because the Arctic got too warm and pushed the cold air south. Further south than normal. I mean, there's always a polar vortex, but it usually never gets this far south. So we're suffering because of it.
Mhm.
You know,
Judy-
everything's connected though, and my career was spent in education, in teacher education. And I look at all this and I think this is the result of generations of children not getting good science education. That what happened with the virus here was an example of people not understanding science, because they say things like, well, the scientist said this, and then 3 months later they changed it and said this. So see, scientists don't know what they're doing, rather than understanding that the scientific process,
Yeah.
as you get more information, you know more and you say things. And so I kind of, it was depressing to me because I looked at my whole career as kind of a failure, because people aren't learning the kinds of things in school they need to learn. But schools have been underfunded since this nation was started, and teachers underappreciated. So there you go. But
And
that's
you're,
also part of the whole thing. Politicians are not well educated in science. A lot of the general public is not well educated in science.
yeah.
So-
And you,
But Judy made a good point a few minutes ago when she mentioned this phrase touchy-feely. And I have this idea that until issues like this become real in a personally touchy-feely way, that it's going to take that kind of experience on a person-to-person level before there is enough of an initiative to say, wait a minute, public policy, there's more to this than just what you want to spend on it, or how important it is in your list of priorities. We're suffering. You better get off your butts and get busy investigating this and changing the system so that we can, 1, learn more about it, 2, take more initiative, and 3, find ways to solve it that all of us can be involved, even at, the private citizen level,
Right.
and stop being run completely by your desire for free market competition and profit.
I have to, this is maybe a political statement. I think it's not necessarily. I'm thinking of my comment about shoreline properties, and then I'm thinking about Mid-America, and they don't understand, for good reason. I mean, a lot of the California coast is going in, but who lives on the California coast? I mean, you can't, most people can't afford to live on the California coast. So the people it's affecting, we're talking about vacation areas, we're talking about resorts, we're talking about all kinds of things. And granted, there are people inside, they're all the workers that are, that are connected with these places. But still, if you are in, Kansas or Oklahoma or Idaho, you're thinking,
Yeah, those people just ought to move away from there, those idiots.
yeah, get a life, you guys, move in. Why you insist on being, on the coastline? So, I mean, there is that kind of push-pull in our country. And we're talking about now, just as I say, it is a little bit political, but that push-pull is there in this topic too, I think.
And
There's
Judy,
a problem.
it's the opposite. It's the opposite in Louisiana, where Katrina displaced all the poor people because they lived in the areas where the rich people didn't want a house. And so it works both ways. I'm sorry, Barbara, I interrupted you.
Well, what I was going to say is it seems like it's a problem of connecting the dots, that there's so many dots out there. There's the scientists, there's the global warming, there's the smog, there's the health things, there's the land falling into the ocean, or we're freezing to death here. And it's so scattered that the average person is not putting it all together. I mean, right now, okay, yeah. I read about the polar vortex and the Arctic getting warmer, and I think, oh, okay, that's why it's really cold here right now.
Yeah, right.
But that's just a little piece of the puzzle. And I don't know what the solution is to get people to see the whole picture and try to connect these dots and connect it with what needs to happen policy-wise. I mean, we need to get these things changed. You and I can't just do it by ourselves. There are certain things we can do, but it's going to take national, international efforts to make any kind of dent. And then they keep talking about when is the have we crossed the line where it's too late to do anything about it? And, I mean, if we accept that, then people won't even try. So we got to get rid of that idea that it's too late.
What are the international organizations that might be dealing with this, conferring?
Well,
et cetera?
I mean, I think
There's-
WHO,
Yeah,
I think
Okay.
they're all kinds of weather-related organizations that look at weather internationally as well as from space. And I mean, I don't really know what all the different organizations are, but they're certainly international. I mean, I think the UN has definitely
Yes,
had
you.
climate piece, the Paris Accords, which we of course dropped out of, but are back in now. I mean, there are efforts going on, but again, it's the average person doesn't know what the efforts are and where to go to get the information.
It's
I want to
huge.
think that we're ending on
Is there hope?
yeah, that's the problem. We need
Always
to
hope.
have hope. We need to have some sort of hope that if we're not going to do this.
well, and and that segues back to, which I didn't get on my printout, but of course, it's a very good word, the catastrophist, which is like, okay, let's get into sci-fi. What's the worst thing that could happen?
Yeah.
Well,
Here's Biden's comment very recently. I don't know what day he said this, but talking isn't going to solve the problem, but it's a start. We've already waited too long to deal with this climate crisis, Biden said last week. It's time to act. So if our president's saying that, that's a start, because the last 4 years we have not had a president saying that. So
yeah.
that's a start.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah, see, I think it's helpful at least that the Biden administration has, publicly said we're going to listen to science and try to take some action in several different areas, but climate being one of those. So that's a step in the right direction, but
Hopeful.
I'm not sure. As many people have said for a long time, Al Gore was saying this like
That's who I keep thinking of.
30 years ago.
he had a pretty high podium to speak from, and that
Wow.
And people made fun of him.
people listened for sure.
Well, and I'm going back, how many years ago? Was it 15, 20, whatever? Remember he had that good video? I mean, I watched it with my grandkids and God knows when that
I
was.
think it's 20 years ago or
Mhm.
close. I'm not
At
sure.
least,
Yeah.
at least.
Yeah. And people made fun of him. Saturday Night Live would have spoofs of him or satire,
Mhm.
which isn't helpful. But anyway,
Wow, wow.
I don't know. So what can we do? What should we do?
As individuals, Linda,
Mhm.
are you asking as individuals or collectively?
Sure. Well, yeah, individually, what could each of us do? I could go turn the temperature down on the and put long underwear on. Actually, I had long underwear on yesterday. I don't today, but for
I guess-
inside the house. I didn't even go outside yesterday, but I had long underwear on.
You can plant a tree. That helps.
Well, yeah, that's the first thing that came to my mind was become better informed.
Yes, definitely, definitely. And that's what we're trying to do.
Mhm.
6 of us are trying to do that. So,
I'm
But
guessing that
as Laura pointed out, there's such an interrelated thing that you've got this big ball of yarn. And how are you going to get to the center? How are you going to unravel it and get a piece that you can hold on to?
yeah, good question.
We can continue to write our Congress people in
Okay.
supporting them and supporting climate change initiatives. And we can plant our tree and we can lower our thermostat and we can recycle and we can do lots of individual things. And if millions and millions of people would do that, it would make a difference. If everybody planted a tree, it would make a difference. We can get them to stop cutting down the Amazon, and we can encourage. One of the big things that people cut down trees for is they need to feed their family. So they cut down the forest next to them so they can feed their family. So if we had programs that would make ecotourism more popular, they'd quit cutting down their trees. I mean, it's all connected. And I think each of us has to find that thing we're kind of interested in, mine being gardening, and
Right.
do.
Yeah, so interestingly, so I saw an article not too long ago that said, oh, well, the solution to all this really is just to plant a lot of trees. And it went on to kind of lay out, well, you know, every tree gives off, you know, so much
Oxygen.
carbon dioxide,
Yeah.
Right.
Soaks in carbon dioxide. Yeah.
and carbon dioxide. I mean, and basically that the number of trees, you know, that you needed to plant in order to counteract this was fairly large, but not impossible to do. So that's one solution that I suppose many people could kind of get behind, even though they may not understand all the science behind it. You know, most everybody likes trees.
It's so hard to grab hold of that, because how big's the tree that you plant and when's it going to make a difference?
Every tree makes a difference.
Right.
Every tree makes a difference. Little tree, if they're got green leaves on them, they're
Yeah.
sucking in carbon dioxide and they're giving out oxygen. So, and not just trees, anything green is taking carbon dioxide out of the air and putting oxygen in it. And
Which-
so having a big pot on your patio even helps.
Well, and supporting our public spaces and parks.
Mhm. Mhm.
A big pot plant on the patio, you say?
Yeah, that's green. So there you go.
Even if it is pot, it's still green.
And I suppose if you're talking, because there are movements to create more green spaces for people to use. And, you know, you're right. We're getting right back to, if, you know, even if it's just grass, how it affects the atmosphere and the environment and everything around it. And, you know, we build our cities and we pave over everything. And
Then complain when we have problems with flooding. You know, you've taken away everything that soaks up rainwater. So
Mhm.
so
Well, and I've just moved from Arizona where you are, Laura, and the amount of water that is wasted in Phoenix alone is unbelievable. And, you know, and then they keep building suburbs that really are not, supposedly they have to show that they can provide water for 40 years, or I don't know what the actual number is, but very few of these developments that have been done that spread. I mean, Phoenix area now is as large as LA, and we have some of that smog there too that LA has because you're in a basin. But just trying to connect the cost, the financial cost to the things that are going on. I mean, one of the things Hansen really recommends is that you pay for carbon. If you put carbon in the air, you need to pay, and that money should then go back into making, you know, sustainable, non-carbon producing ways of producing electricity, solar and wind and other kinds of things that would support decreasing the carbon input into the atmosphere. So, I mean, I think, and that's something that has to be a political decision, that we have to support that this has to cost money. We've got to make it costly to continue to pollute the environment.
yeah.
and he's probably profit making is probably the only way that's going to solve this. If you can make it unprofitable to use fossil fuels and profitable to do other things,
Exactly. Yeah.
people will
Until
start.
that happens, everything else is just going to be little dribs and drabs of ways to change things. So it's that same old thing, follow the money.
It's interesting though, there's a woman in, I think it was Kenya, I'm forgetting now. She made it her life mission to plant trees, to reforest, make a green belt And she received a Nobel Prize for it some years ago. And she has since died, but her daughter and her family are continuing this tradition, and they planted millions of saplings.
Yeah.
And there's good news too. There are groups all over the United States trying to promote this. I have a friend who lives up north, and she got a grant from the, I forget, Forest Service someplace, and they brought her 6,000 seedlings, and she planted them on her acreage. And they paid her to do that. And so she's got this little forest growing on her land that is supporting the climate. So there are lots of people out there that are, on a happier note, there are lots of people trying to make a difference. And if we get enough of those people, it will make a difference, I think.
Well, shall we wrap this up and take a few-minute break? I have
break. Yeah.
11 o'clock, we'll start talking about trains.
Yeah, yeah. We'll segue into train. So
Okay.
thank you Linda, very much. That was good. Very much. See you guys just back here in a couple minutes.
Thank you, Linda.
Thanks.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. No, we did the first class. Now we got to do the second class, and I get to do it too. Okay, I wondered if you were going to go. What? No, I think, I'm going to go, when I go get my haircut, I'm going to get some groceries on the way back. I made a list. All right, let me get my. Here. So what kind of errands are you running? I don't have any times when I can't go after this afternoon to get my hair cut today.
Okay.
All right. See what we can use.
Okay. You are gonna wear your hearing aids. That's probably a good idea.
I don't have you there to interpret.
And when you come back, if I'm done, we should switch cars because I don't want to drive the Highlander.
Yours is in the garage.
I know, so we need to switch before I leave at 1:30 for my hair appointment.
We can work it out.
I know, I'm just telling you, we could, if I'm done with my
If I'm
class.
gone, you don't have to switch, you just have to back out.
Yeah, but that's 2 hours, 2.5 hours from now before.
Well, I'm just saying, it's not a big deal that we have to worry about right now.
I know, I'm just saying, when you get back, we could switch then. So you don't have to go back outside or whatever.
Hey, I'm talking through your screen. Say hi, Jim, from Judy.
Oh, Judy says hi to you, Jim. He says hi.
Welcome to Kansas City.
Going out to run errands. He's going to find the DMV because we need to get titles changed, driver's license, car licenses. And the website is so ridiculous. You have to have an appointment, but there's no way to get one. So he's going to go find the place and find out what to do.
I appreciate that feedback. I actually let my license expire. Who knew? And so I have to take a driving test. And I thought about getting on and trying to get an appointment. I thought, no, I'm just going to drive there and, turn myself in, take a good book, sit in line, whatever, and do it when I have to do it. I've been driving on a bad license for too long.
Well, I don't know whether we have to take a driving test in Kansas or not. I mean, Jim's found out we don't. Thank goodness.
Good. Yeah. Well, mine expired after 6 months. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, that's it. That's the problem. That's what Jim said. If yours hasn't expired, then you're okay.
I
'Cause I was
mean,
afraid because we're both over 80 that they'd still want us to prove that we could safely drive. And
yeah,
I wasn't interested in having to do that.
it took one of my doctor's appointments or someplace to look at my driver's license and, did you know this is expired? So anyway,
Yeah.
it'll all be fine.
Well, the sooner we get the driver's licenses, then we have state ID, which may be required for some of these places where we're trying to get our second vaccine.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
So
yeah.
if we can get it done ASAP, it would be good.
Right.
We
Right.
got the cars inspected, and they passed inspection, so that's good.
Good. Yeah. Well, I know the process. You do too, of moving, between states and all the stuff you have to do.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then COVID on top of it has just made it even more.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's colder than you know what outside. All of those things are just complicated matters. All right, so we're going to do the Because the Night, the Enduring Romance of the Sleeper Train by Anthony Lane. And he's a I don't know if he's an editor for the New Yorker, but he writes a lot about literature, about movies, about plays. He doesn't do music, but so he's sort of one of the cultural editors of the New Yorker. And I just was interested in this article. It actually was published in May 8th, 2020. So, back in the spring when Judy asked me to do this, I started looking at articles back then, which is how I ended up with a couple of older, not that current, but they seem to be current no matter what. So I want to start by reading this, and you probably all read this, but I just thought it was a good way to start this. It's the poem by T.S. Eliot.
The Practical Cats, yes.
Apartments for sleeping, and it just brought back memories for me. It's very pleasant when you have found your little den with your name written on the door. And the berth is very neat with a newly folded sheet, and there's not a speck of dust on the floor. There is every sort of light. You can make it dark or bright. There's a handle that you turn to make a breeze. There's a funny little basin you're supposed to wash your face in and a crank to shut the window if you sneeze. So I mean, I love T.S. Eliot poems and all these cat things and everything, but anyway, it's just interesting. And I thought I'd just start by asking, how many of you have ridden on a night train?
Well,
Diane too, you have? Yep.
Yep.
My experience, I'm going to give you mine. I was 13 years old. My aunt, who lived in Phoenix and taught, and I had summers off, so she'd go places and I'd go with her. Well, my parents put me on a train, I believe in Centralia, Illinois. I know it was Centralia, Illinois. And I got on a train, and it was an overnight train to New Orleans, where my aunt met me. And I was only 13. I don't know what my parents were thinking, but clearly they weren't worried about it. So they figured I could do it. And I met this lovely woman who kind of took me under her wing. She was pregnant herself with her first child, and I think decided to sort of adopt me. But it was an amazing experience. And I just remember the births and all that kind of thing. So anyway, who else has been on a night train? Laura.
I was in North Dakota. We were going across North Dakota because I had family there. But I remember there wasn't a lot to see out the windows except the prairie. But I loved sleeping on the train, and I loved the little room with your little sink and your little bed, and it just felt real cozy, and I liked the noise. I was young, but I remember it very pleasantly.
It was, for me, I'm sorry, Laura, were you complete?
Yep.
Okay. For me, it was a major form of when my father transferred around the country. So I've taken it several times as a child. Some of them were hilarious journeys with my father jumping up to re-slam a door that kept opening during the middle of the night and had us all in tears. We were laughing so hard by about the fifth time. And then from Florida to New York, and from, let me see, there was one in there that was, well, it was different from Chicago or someplace. And then as an adult, I've done that myself. And as recently as several years ago, I took a long loop of, let me see, it would have been a total of about 7 days and 6 nights on the train around the US. And they've just got a certain romance to them, and they've got a certain aura of camaraderie that develops on the train. And that's where I've met some of the most interesting people I've ever met in my life. And even though Amtrak is sort of basic right these days, it's still pleasant. Oh, I know, along the California coast from Los Angeles north. And that train still had some of the beautiful old cars, a club car with, I just have to mention this because it was so gorgeous. It had beautiful mahogany dividers with etched glass panels and a big bar with a brass rail around it, and club car seats. And it was just delightful. So in fact, as soon as we get to where we can travel more, that's my goal, is to take another big long loop somewhere, maybe across Canada, although that's gotten very, very expensive.
Diana, what were your sleeping accommodations like?
When I was young and traveling with my family, we had one of those larger cabins, that was multiple beds and shower and all of that. When I was traveling on my own, I would get roomettes. And more recently, roomettes, which are very comfortable, really, in many ways. The bed is a little bit narrower if you're used to a full or full size, a full size single, but not that uncomfortable.
Mm.
And the dining car service has, in my experience, always been interesting and pleasant. And in some of the menus in the Amtrak are famous around the country these days. Although I imagine they're backward a bit with restrictions on who can serve what and to whom and how. But I look for that to come back. And I notice, I follow trains a little bit. I noticed that Amtrak is starting to build some new cars. So it bodes well in the future for train travel. And honestly, it's so insulting to fly anymore that I'd rather go by the train. I don't, there's less pressure. You have more social space. And in many cases, if you're hopping halfway across the country, it ends up being practical as well for timing and so on.
I can kick in here with my, probably my experience living in Chicago, you know, off and on for many years. And they still have a huge Union Station that's very, very busy.
Gorgeous.
Gorgeous old station. And of course, the advantage is you walk out of there and there's a cab and you are like 4 minutes from where you're going. And of course, you know, I've done flights to Chicago most of the time, but last year, just a little over a year ago, my son, a little bit of a romantic, and granddaughter, Catherine, 23 or 24 at the time, they flew to Kansas City and spent the night in my condo here. And we got up early in the morning because every morning at 7:30, a train goes to Chicago. And we had just a wonderful day, the three of us, you know, flown it 1,000 times, driven it too many times too. But it was, you know, it was just, and of course the food was not good compared to, you know, what I recall from other experiences. And then I'll tell you about one night experience, but my other experience was when my kids were little, like 1 and 4, probably. Melinda, you know, still, my daughter still, you know, handheld for sure. My husband worked for, or his law firm has a client, Amtrak. So we got free fare on Amtrak, which we weren't making much money, and it was a wonderful excuse for me to get on the train at, oh, it was early. It was early. We got up in the dark. The kids remember that with fondness. We got up in the dark. We drove to the station. We got on that, you know, 7 a.m. train. And by 3 in the afternoon, we were in Chicago. And my mom, you know, had driven in from their place out in Indiana and met us. And, you know, I remember her just, you know, being so excited about seeing the grandkids. And like you say, it was a wonderful way to travel with little kids. I mean, not long after that, we tried airplanes, not nearly as fun. I remember David 3, 4, you know, you're sitting there and you've got like double seats and they're sitting on the floor and they've got all their toys around them and they could run up and down the aisle and play with other kids. And like you say, Diana, it's just a totally, I have to share one night experience. I'm not sure, you're just gonna, this is, I don't think I've shared this with anybody. I was 12 or 13 and I was taking the train to Colorado Springs, where a very favorite cousin lived who I hardly ever got to see, to spend a couple weeks with her, my cousin Barbara. And I was traveling by myself, of course. And to El Capitan you got on, and it was an overnight train. So I had this little overnight bag. And I ended up at this seat sitting with a young man. I have no idea why. Maybe it was crowded. Didn't know him at all, but there was this young man sitting next to me. And I was a very shy 12, 13-year-old, you know, not sophisticated like today's. And I remember I got up and I went into the bathroom and I changed into my overnight clothes, which I had brought. And that was a little pair of, we call them capris. And I don't know what else. And came back and got myself situated. And, you know, you could almost stretch out and sleep on those chairs. I never went to sleep, you know, the actually sleeper place. And suddenly in the middle of the night, what do I see sort of approaching me, sort of like almost on top of me, is this person. And I mean, you can imagine, the panic, he probably didn't know what he was doing. I didn't know what he was doing. And I was so mortified by that. I couldn't talk about it for years. I'm sure I had female guilt, you know, that what did I do to cause this? So that was my night experience. I should only say that coming back from Chicago, we take it at 3 in the afternoon and you get into Kansas City about 10 o'clock at night. And love that train. You know, like you say, the dining car was great, and then the coach car was wonderful. We would play cards on the coach car with anybody around. There were card games going. Just love that, and just the slow down. It's just hypnotic, and mentally, I think it's makes me think maybe I need to do it again, because you can't go anywhere. You gotta just be in the moment. So my experiences.
Well, I think, you know, been reading this article and then listening to all of you talk too about it. It brings back lots of other memories, particularly Europe. You know, we have a daughter who lives in Germany, and we never like to ride with her husband because he's a fireman. And when he drives like a fireman, and it's terrifying. So whenever we were going to go someplace with them, we always said, we're going by train. So we had lots of train trips in Germany, and probably the longest one was from Hamburg to Munich, and then a shorter train trip from there over into the Alps, the German Alps. But anyway, so those brought out, and then I remembered a time when we had flown to Paris with our kids, who were 4 and 6 at the time, if I remember correctly. They were really young, and got on it. And so we'd already been on a plane for hours, and then we got right on a train and got in a, you know, third class train, and our kids had a ball because they were running around. And by the time we got to the place we were going in France, they were so filthy that I was afraid the grandmother who was meeting us there would never even recognize them. But they remember that trip really fondly. I remember, and we got on a car that ended up not going where we had to go. So we are hauling all our luggage to a different car before we got disconnected and ended up in the wrong place. So I remember that trip not fondly, but the kids had a great time. So anyway, I just think reading this train story, at first I read it thinking, well, you know, there are environmental reasons, because I just already read that other catastrophist environmental climate change thing. And there are advantages to train travel versus flying, because there's a lot less carbon used up or put out.
Yes.
So that was my first thought. But then when I read the article again last night, it just brought back all those other fun memories of different travel. And I figured all of you that had that kind of experience would do the same thing.
Yeah, I really loved the article. I think the author just wrote in such a great way that it sort of drew me in, and I just look forward to reading more of it just because it was the way it was written so well. But my first experience, I guess, you know, living around Kansas City and so on, didn't really have very many opportunities to ride on the train. But I remember my first train trip was going to Parsons, Kansas from Kansas City, and took a train. Too much snow to drive. But what I remember about that is a train from Kansas City to Parsons, I don't know, which was about what, 2.5 hour drive, took about 5 or 6 hours, and it stopped like every, I don't know.
The local.
I was not enamored by the train travel because of that, because it was slow. But you know, since then, I've taken trains, you know, mostly in Europe several different times, and was always a delightful experience, really. And I can relate to the fact, you know, you can get on the train and you can get up and walk around and so on. And having spent a lot of time in the air and flying different places, it's like, wow, how nice it is to travel by train, to be able to relax and kind of get up and walk around and do your own thing. When you're flying, you're just going to sit there and hope that the plane doesn't go down before you go to the next stop.
Which of course begs the question about, Amtrak, is it going to die? Are we going to improve it? What's it going to look like? No, says Diana.
No, if I kind of follow them a little bit and read some of the train aficionado journals, and what I'm gathering, although I'm not an insider by any stretch of the imagination, is that the demand for train travel has steadily increased in the last couple of years, even before the pandemic. And that with that in mind, and the fact that Amtrak at the organizational level reinvented itself a few years ago, and now it's not dependent entirely on grants from the federal government, that it's really moving out and moving up. And my suspicion is, while it's going to morph into something a little bit different than it was, because change is happening, it's not going to go away. It'll still be there. And in fact, in one of the recent magazines I read, there are some new routes being established even as we speak.
Yeah, and then there's a high-speed train between here and St. Louis. Have you heard
That's
about
the bullet
that?
train that's under consideration now. Yeah, there's a lot of talk about that. I don't think it's on the ground or even funded yet, but it's a concept that's getting a lot of attention. The Northeast corridor from south of Washington clear to Boston is one of the busiest routes in the world.
Wow, that's a long way.
And think about President Biden, who rode the train every day.
Yeah, exactly.
When he was a senator and a representative, so he could go home to take care of his sons when he was, widowed before his remarriage.
I'm hopeful because he's appointed Buttigieg as the transportation secretary, and I'm hopeful that he will be pro trains.
Yeah,
I don't know whether that's true. I haven't read enough about what he thinks about transportation. I think there was some confusion about why he was nominated, but basically because he knows how to get things done. So that would be a good thing. Yeah, Judy, you were going to say something.
Well, Pete Buttigieg strikes me as somebody who might be pro-train.
Yeah.
So, knowing the little that I do, I was only going to, just because we're talking about trains, and then Linda, don't lose your train of thought, but not too long ago, I had a couple friends, and because of kind of physical disabilities, they were, airline travel wasn't working for them. They took that wonderful train across Canada. And actually,
Rocky Mountaineer. Yeah.
And actually it pulls into certain stops, and they got out and stayed in beautiful hotels.
That's it.
And it sounded like a wonderful trip. I have no doubt it didn't cost an arm and a leg, probably like anything you would do in Europe. But
probably an arm, a leg, and another arm these days.
Yeah, it's extremely expensive.
Yeah, I have no doubt. But as I say, their travel is totally limited. So I'm sure this was, but they did to treat themselves to, sometime when they could be together and see the world from a different standpoint. So, but I think that sounds wonderful.
Yeah, I had friends, or actually my cousin and his wife, who took that train. They didn't go all the way across, but they went about halfway and then flew back from wherever they ended up. But they said it was a wonderful trip. The only problem was it was when all that smoke was up in the Northwest. And so they didn't get to see nearly as much as they would have hoped. Like Glacier National Park was the smoke, that the fires a couple of summers ago. But they want to do it again. So
yeah, and
if I could, I'd love to share a little funny story from my trip north from Los Angeles. I was sitting in this club car enjoying conversation with a couple who clearly did a lot of train travel. And they were telling me about their you know, and I said, well, how do you do this? I mean, what's your secret? Because by anybody's standards, that's a lot of train traveling. He said, oh, we have a credit card that accumulates points. And if they're traveling and they're accumulating points for every dollar that they spend, there's some practical aspects to that. And he said, in fact, he looked at me and he said, in fact, I had to buy a new car. And so I went to the dealership and he bought some on the upper end car, which it wasn't in the 100,000, so it was clearly up there around 50. And if you look at the listings, and he said, and while I was sitting there doing the paperwork signing, I looked at the salesperson and I said, can I put this on my credit card? And he said, if you have the credit line, sure. So he bought that car with his Amtrak credit card. Wow. And he said, and now I have 147, thousand points.
Wow.
I went, oh, okay. So there was a cute little lesson there about how to accumulate points. And so now I have an Amtrak point accumulating credit card. I couldn't get over the car purchase thing.
And then we're talking about today's world, and and our grandkids, are they going to get on a train to go somewhere? Just
I hope.
The 20-somethings, do they have that kind of patience?
Certainly have. My German grandchildren have grown up riding trains, and probably been on trains more than they've been on planes, even coming over here. So
but
I've got grands that do that.
About Europe and the Eurail Pass and all that kind of thing is, those trains are on time. You can set your watch for those trains.
Yeah.
Unless there's some really horrible thing like the tracks are out or something, they're really on time. And we learned that probably the hard way by dawdling and that train left 2 minutes ago and too bad. Anyway, we learned to set our watches by the train travel.
Well, and probably in that thought, as I say, my granddaughter Catherine came and we did the three of us last January, and it was great fun. But it wasn't like the old days. The food was awful, just awful. Yeah. And it used to be. I've had many a breakfast on Amtrak, and
are you talking about the dining car?
The dining car.
Okay, all right.
It was so limited and so cold and so just not what I remember the dining car to be. But it was still, I mean, there might have been there probably were tablecloths, maybe, I'm not sure. But anyway, if we made it, if we were able to make them a pleasant experience that way too, so you don't feel like a kind of a second class person visiting a bad neighborhood for bad food.
I asked a question about that at some point because I noticed that same thing on the Kansas City to Chicago that I've taken a couple of times. And I said, this is not like the dining I had going across on the Santa Fe Chief or the Southwest Chief, whichever it's called. And he said, well, that was an overnight sleeper train. This is not. So we put a much better quality of service on the sleeper trains than we do on the day trains, like to Chicago. What's interesting to me is that's the last leg of the Chief from Kansas City to Chicago. So clearly they've, done all their fancy stuff, and now they're just taking care of the peons,
One of the things, that last paragraph that actually gave me, when reading this again last night, gave me the suggestion. It says, just take a map out and run your finger along the healed scars of the railroad lines and locate stations and start to plot. And I thought, that's a really good thing. I'm going to do that. I'm going to get the atlas out and I'm going to figure out a place that I want to go on a train. And I think it sounds like a fun thing to do while we're pretty much holed up in our homes and not going anyplace, have hardly even driven a car. So what a nice idea.
Well, it's
if you go to Amtrak's website and look around, you'll find a big map of their routes too, which will help you.
Okay, that's
Sorry,
fine.
Judy.
I can't imagine wanting to do that during COVID.
Well, no, it's gonna have, it has to be after COVID, and that's basically.
Do the planning during.
Planning,
Bad
yes.
idea.
The other tidbit I found about the Pullman, he talked about the Pullman car and how George Pullman actually designed and built that car, and it got to be very famous because it transported Lincoln's body back to Springfield. But I found out a little bit more about George Pullman, and he was not a nice man. He was compared to Bismarck or somebody as far as being a tough boss. And he actually built a town and named it Pullman, Illinois, where the plant was where they were building the Pullman cars. And I mean, he basically treated those people like slaves. They had poor working conditions and high rent, and they were forced to live there. And even when the rent went up, they didn't raise the prices, and they actually ended up having a strike where people got shot. So, that name of Pullman, Illinois is no longer there. But there is a Pullman, Washington, where my husband went to school. Washington State is in Pullman, Washington. And they named that town Pullman because they were hoping to have major railroad lines going through the city of Pullman. And instead they skipped it and went to Spokane. So my husband spent 4 years in Pullman, Washington. I asked him, do you know why your town was called Pullman? And he says, no. Anyway, money talks sometimes.
But we're at the end of this fun time together, you guys. 4 good weeks, 4 good conversations, and it's been good for me, and I hope it's been good for you. And I want to thank everybody for.
Lovely.
Well, thank you for organizing it. It's all been very interesting.
Yeah.
I feel like I've gotten to know 4 new friends.
I do too. Thank you for that, Laura. I do too.
And talk about some other things. It's good. Talk about lots of things. I'm so glad we covered so many. And I am noticing, I was just thinking, we were looking for articles and we decided not to do anything COVID related or real immediate. And it was kind of hard, like in, I don't know what, December, January, to find stuff that was, everything was so kind of still committed to the now. And, I just opened up my last New York Times. We're opening up everything now and seeing some really good reading, which is not,
Oh, yes.
it's so good to know that, that writers are able to come out of wherever they were in November and December and start, looking ahead. So
If you're interested, New Yorker Online right now has about a 40% off deal. So if you're interested.
Yeah.
And the writing in New Yorker is so good.
Oh yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, both of these articles I had were from the New Yorker. I had looked at Times. The other article I had picked possibly was about free speech from the New York Times. But anyway,
yeah. So,
I think it's fun. And are we going to do it again, Judy, for the summer?
not for the summer. I don't know unless somebody else wants to organize this, but maybe fall.
Well, okay.
Thanks, Judy.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And Linda, wonderful stuff today. Enjoyed your making us think.
Yeah, and I did say that. Yeah, that was, great. She chose the articles and she led them, and we know all that she's been doing in addition. So we really
In addition to
It's been
that.
a nice
Yeah.
break. Luckily, I had no boxes to unpack because the truck's not here yet. So
that was good.
When's it supposed to get there?
delays, the better, because
Yeah.
unloading in this kind of weather will be brutal if they get here anytime in the next week. So we're hoping they're stuck in Arizona.
Yeah.
Hold that vision.
That we need, because we've been living in this house without any of it. So anyway, we'll manage. So good to see everybody. Thank you.
Good to
Thank
see
you, Linda.
Bye.
Everybody be safe and happy. And I really enjoyed being with you. Thank you.
you.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay.